nutritious and even appealing to the eye meal for yourself. So to start with the pickles, I'm going to start with the red onion. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the pickles and the onions cut. I'm going to tell you why I'm preparing them the way I'm preparing them. And I'm going to let the salt do its work. While the salt is doing its work, I'm going to show you the other pickle techniques, and then we'll come back to these. Then we'll be talking about some bulk purchasing a little bit. One last thing before I get into that is to run down different methods of preservation. So of course there's refrigeration and freezing. So if any of those items in Mary's freezer could be frozen, that would be a great option. And perhaps in chat, if there are specific questions about how one might do that, we can address that. A lot of vegetables that you might not think can be frozen actually can, depending on how you use them after you thaw them. Fermentation is a great way of preserving food. So if anyone's family makes sauerkraut or kimchi, things like this, I strongly urge you to get your family's recipe because that is a treasure. It can also be a little tricky though. So please do not try food fermenting if you aren't taking advice from someone who really knows what they're doing, because that can become hazardous. Canning is the same way. It's probably simpler than fermentation, but there are hazards to not canning properly. It's a little bit of an advanced technique, and we won't get into that today. But it is a great way to take care of your bumper crop of cucumbers or tomatoes and have some emergency food for later. And some canned foods, particularly pickles, can be the most delicious when you prepare them and can them yourself. Smoking is a great way of curing foods and preserving foods. Salt curing is a great way. An example would be a Scandinavian dish called rabbit lox, where you're curing your raw fish with salt and liquor and herbs, and comes up with something nice. Pasteurization is a method of preserving. And so, of course, all the milk that we buy is ultra pasteurized. I'm sorry, it is simply pasteurized. So it is safe to store in the refrigerator for a shorter duration. If you're traveling in Europe, you're more likely to see a shelf stable. By that I mean it's safe to hold at room temperature, and that would be ultra pasteurized milk. Flavor is going to be different. It can be more convenient to hold it on the shelf for a longer period rather than in your refrigerator. And you may be able to find shelf stable milk and cream at your supermarket. But today we're going to do quick pickling because it's fast, it's easy, it's good for folks who are just getting into cooking or just getting into this kind of preservation. And the shelf life is going to range from many days to up to a month. And the best way to tell when your things are going off is just by the texture, the smell, the flavor. So these onions that we're going to pickle will easily last for a month. I have a high tolerance for the kind of funky fruitiness that they develop over time, so I'll use them right up to the end. You'll determine what your window of preference is. And you'll definitely know if they're starting to get a little funky that it's time to get rid of them. But this is a great way to buy yourself some time. Have these things on hand so you can incorporate them into meals. Things like these pickled onions are extremely versatile. I'll put them in salads. I'll put them on whole grain and bean concoction. I'll add them to pasta with fresh mozzarella and fresh herbs. And it's just a wonderful thing to have on hand, a great pantry staple. And let's talk a little bit about how to cut an onion. So use whatever knife you're comfortable with. That's a matter of choice, maybe a subject for another day. But if you don't have one of these sharpening steels, or I do recommend that you get it, a honing steel. How you do it is you can hold it like this with the point on the counter. That's going to be the safest way since you're waving a knife around. If you prefer to hold it like this, you can. A motion away from you is always the safest. And after you become very confident in it, you can do it like this if you want. But what this is doing is, even with a sharp knife, that edge is very thin. And after you use it, that end starts to go like this. And so it's still very thin, but it's not giving you a sharp result because it's curved at the end. By running it over this honing steel, what you're doing in those few strokes is realigning that tip so that it's nice and sharp for you. And as you've heard, a sharp knife is a lot safer than a dull knife. So I do recommend that you get them sharp, keep them sharp. How are we going to cut the onion? There are different ways. So let's look at the onion here and see that there is a root end with these little hair-like guys, and there is the other end. The root end is going to be good for holding the onion together. And let me show you why that might be important. So I'm going to take this end off. And for those of you who are going to be doing these types of things at home, we have a service on campus, Marber, where we send out our trash, our recycling, and even our compostable waste so that things don't go to waste. I just use the word waste, but it will actually go and become compost and feed the vegetables for the future. At home, this is a wonderful thing to do, to go ahead and do your own compost. If you don't have a yard, you can still have a windowsill garden, and that's a lot of fun. So one thing that I did there is that I meant to show you. I'm sorry I didn't. After I took the end off, cutting something that is a ball is inherently unsafe. You always want to get to a flat surface as quickly as you can. So it was unavoidable for me to be holding the ball like that, so I'm holding it carefully. I cut like that. Now I've got this flat surface. After I peeled it, that's why I came down this way. And as we can see, this root end is holding the onion together. For my cuts, I don't want that. I'm going to take it off. But if I was going to dice the onion by going down and then in and then cutting it down into a dice, having this root end still attached is going to really help me out because it's going to hold the onion together while I'm trying to do that. So that's a technique if you're going to be dicing. Since I won't be dicing, all this is going to go for composting. And then you can slice it down this way. And this is going to give you a semicircle, more like an onion ring that you might put on a sandwich. But for a number of reasons that we don't necessarily need to get into, I prefer to come down this way. So instead of cutting with these loops, I'm cutting across them. I prefer that shape. It's going to be more of less of a curve to it. It's going to look more like julienne ingredients that I might choose to add. And so I'm going to cut it down this way. When I'm right at this end of the onion, there's a great curve on it. And if I come straight down, I'm going to wind up with a rather wide piece that I'd rather not have. Now, it's not the end of the world. I can come back and cut it down like this, and then I've got my uniform pieces back. But I can also start off by coming in at a little bit of an angle and working my way around by coming in at angles. I'm going to get uniform pieces. Please also notice that when I'm holding this, especially because I have this big sharp knife, I'm curling my fingers under, and what that's allowing me to do is to hold on to the food, but also making it less likely that a slip of the knife is going to cut my fingertip. So coming down like that, coming in, you can go as fast as you want. And the more you're going to cook, the more you're going to appreciate having some speed. Great vegetables to practice chopping to increase your speed are going to be zucchini and mushroom, because their texture makes it very easy to do it quickly. And so if you want to practice on some mushrooms or zucchini, and you will definitely see your speed increase. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish up this guy. And because we want the salt to do the work for us, I'm going to break up these pieces. Now, when I say a very simple pickle, this is the simplest a pickle can be. I'm going to be using salt. There is sugar. There's vinegar. There's my onions. Now, the way that I'm using sugar is what's called a simple syrup. So I'm taking equal parts of sugar and water and heating it. Can you just dissolve sugar in water? Absolutely, you can. Your result, though, after a few days is going to be that your water is going to start to cloud. And I don't like that cloudiness. We're also going to talk about that when we talk about spices. So to avoid the cloudiness, if you mix your equal parts of sugar and water, bring them to a boil, let it simmer for 10 minutes, the sugar will be dissolved in such a way that it will not turn cloudy on you for 6 months, which is longer than your pickle is going to last. So I recommend making some syrup, keeping it around. It's great to add to coffee or tea, or if you're adjusting a sauce or a salad dressing that has oil in it. Sugar and salt are not oil soluble. And so by having your sugar already dissolved in water, you're making it very easy for yourself in the future to adjust the flavor of whatever you want very easily. So this is a great thing to have in a jar. Maybe you use up an old pasta jar, clean that out and save it. This is a great thing to put in there, keep in your refrigerator. It'll last for 6 months. As far as salt, I've got my vegetable broken up here, and I'm spraying it out on my cutting board. And I'm using kosher salt. I'm using kosher salt. You're not going to be able to see this on the camera, but kosher salt has a coarser texture than table salt. Table salt is fine to use. If you're going to do that, I recommend that you have it in a shaker and shake it on. One of the hazards of trying to sprinkle it with your fingers with table salt is that you'll probably not be able to sprinkle it as easily as if you use kosher salt. So I would recommend using a shaker, but in this case, I'm just going to sprinkle it like this. So it's just between my fingers. I'm just rubbing my fingers together to get it to come out slowly. And I'm going to apply it liberally. Now, we could dissolve this in our vinegar or our sugar water, but I want the salt to work on the vegetable. I do these very frequently, and this is just one of those things that I've noticed. It's a personal preference. If you want to go ahead and put your salt in your sugar water or your vinegar, that's okay. But for our cucumbers and our onions, I'm going to apply the salt. I'm going to mix it together, and what this is going to start to do is mellow out the onion and draw some of the water out. Drawing some of the water out is going to be important for the different processes that are taking place that will preserve it. So before I apply anything else, I'm going to set these aside and let the salt do its work. And I'll get started on the cucumbers. But when we come back to it, what we're going to do is we're going to add equal parts vinegar and simple syrup. You may not like that combination. You may think it's too sweet. You may think it's too sour. If you'd like to dilute it with some water, by all means, do so. If there's too much water and not enough vinegar, it may affect the shelf life of your onion, but adjust these things according to taste. Absolutely. And I'm using a distilled white vinegar. I choose this because it's inexpensive and it has a neutral flavor. There are all kinds of vinegars out there. You can absolutely use whatever vinegar you like for this, but by making this way, I can add this to so many dishes without any underlying flavor of balsamic or apple or any of these things. And so, it's, again, this is kind of a lowest common denominator ingredient that I want to be able to use in as many things. So that's why I've chosen distilled white vinegar. Now we're going to go on to our cucumbers. And you can use whatever cucumbers you've got. So if they're growing in your yard, use them. Particularly the regular cucumber that we think of when we think of a cucumber about that big is going to have a thick skin and it's going to have a lot of food grade wax on it. And that's not going to make, that skin is not going to make a very nice pickle. Can you use them to make pickles? Absolutely. But this is my preference. One of the recipes that we're making today calls for English cucumbers. These happen to be Persian cucumbers. They're very similar. The English cucumber is going to be longer. This one is clearly shorter. This would be more for pickling through a canning process, but also you can, I don't know if you'll be able to pick up that the skin is very, very thin on this. And having a nice thin skin is going to lend itself well to this particular quick pickling process. Now, if you want to do one at a time, that's cool. If you want to do 3 at a time, that's cool too. If you don't like the ends, you might be a 3-year-old. My 3-year-old doesn't like these. So I set them aside and Dad eats them in his salad. If I were just making the pickle for myself, I would include those. But feel free to put them in your compost if you want. And you can come down and cook just like this. Again, watch how I'm curling my fingers under. And we're looking for a size about like that. Can you guys see that? This is a good size because if it's too thick, our pickling isn't going to get in and do what it needs to do. And if it's too thin, it's just going to come up as mush in just a couple of days. So from my experience, again, all this is about personal preference. I think this is an ideal size, okay? And so I'm going to cut these guys down. I'm trying to swipe the cucumbers away as I'm chopping down, because if they start to creep down to where you're cutting, you'll wind up cutting through one. It's not the end of the world, but your stuff won't look as nice. So maybe slide them away as you're cutting. Down, and then that little root piece won't be nice, so we're going to compost it. As if you are going to go ahead and make compost, another thing that you might choose to do is to grow cuttings. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I didn't salt my cucumbers. So here we go again with sprinkling the salt. I want to try to apply it fairly evenly. And then I'm going to toss my cucumbers a little bit to spread that salt around. And then into the container they go. If you're going to scoop with your knife, be really careful. I would say until you're a little more seasoned, don't do it. I'm going to do it because I'm used to it. But one thing that can happen if you're doing what I'm doing right here is if your knife isn't flush against the cutting board, you can wind up giving yourself a little cut right there. So maybe have a spatula, just use your hands, or if you're going to do it the way that I'm doing it right now, please be very careful. Again, we're going to set these aside to let the salt do their work. We talked about the syrup that we're going to use. We talked about the vinegar. We're going to come back to that. But I'll go ahead and take this opportunity to show you that one that I made on Friday. So there's the overview. I don't know if you're getting a very good look at it, but here's how they look side by side. So you can see this one has turned a really beautiful color. You can imagine that in a pasta dish or a cold salad. And the harshness of the onion is really mellowed by this quick pickling process. And again, these are going to last, to my taste, I'll use these for up to 4 weeks. Now, that's how those will turn out. We'll come back to pickle these after we start working on our next pickle, which is going to be our Mexican style vegetable escabeche. So the veg we have here is cauliflower florets, carrot coins, about this size, some fairly thick cut red onion, jalapeno, herbs and spices that we're using are bay leaf, salt, whole cloves. See if we can get a good look at these whole cloves. You don't use very much. They're loaded with flavor. And then oregano. You can use whatever oregano you've got, but there is a difference, a noticeable difference between Italian oregano, or Mediterranean oregano, and Mexican oregano. And so if you have Mexican oregano or can get it, this is going to give you some better flavor there. And I'm going to get a pot.
We have a question.
Yes, please.
How do you spell what you are making right now?
Okay, so that is going to be E-S like Sam, C-A, B like boy, E-C-H-E. And as I understand it, the recipe is provided. If you're trying to look it up on your own, you're going to want to look for one that is a vegetable one. This type of escabeche can be the name of this vegetable dish, which is very common in taquerias. If you go to get your tacos, they might have the radishes and the cilantro and onion and different salsas. And then they'll also have this. But escabeche can also be a seafood dish. So just want to make that distinction. But that's E-S-C-A-B-E-C-H-E.
Great, thank you.
And we're going to use some water here and some vinegar. If we use straight vinegar, it's going to be too strong. And in fact, we want this to have some tang and some piquancy. We could certainly use a distilled vinegar, but in this case, I used rice vinegar. If you are limited on space and you're just going to choose one vinegar, I really suggest that you choose the white distilled vinegar. But if you can also get rice vinegar, it's got a very delicate flavor. It's really nice, but you'll choose what vinegars you like. So I've combined my water and my vinegar there. I'm going to get this going, and I'm going to simmer my spices in there for a moment, and I'm going to pour it over my cut vegetables. The garlic that I've got here has already been crushed, but I don't like to have little pieces of things in my pickles. That's a personal preference. I don't like cloudiness. I don't like little tiny twiggy things. I don't like all kinds of little floaties. Now, if you look at a typical pickling spice, which we'll come back to later in bulk purchasing, there are some small pieces in there, but if you want to mince up your garlic, go for it. But to me, I'm going to get all the flavor I want if I just take a whole garlic clove and press it under my knife until you can see that it's, not if I have my hand in front of it, you can't. You can see that it's kind of broken up, but it still has some integrity, so that especially if somebody doesn't want a piece of garlic in their food, they can easily pick it out, and it's gonna maintain its integrity in here. So that's how that's gonna go. I'm gonna get this on to get hot. And I'm gonna move this aside and show you how we're gonna get started on a turmeric and star anise pickle. So again, we've got our vinegar and our water that we're gonna start heating. Both of these pickles have a little bit more complex ingredients, and the liquid is going to be hot. That's also going to help to soften vegetables. We'll talk about the importance of that. The ones that we're coming back to with the cucumber and the onion, these are cold. The liquid never gets heated for that. But I'm going to get both of these going. And we can talk about the other ingredients that we have here and why they're cut the way they're cut. So we've got jicama. The recipe here is calling for a variety of light-colored vegetables. So there's a lot of leeway here. You can use turnips, fennel. Here we're using jicama. If you aren't familiar with jicama, it's a rather large ball. I'm sorry I don't have one that's not cut here to show you, but it's about softball size, and it's light brown and has an extremely crunchy texture. Some ways a little bit of sweetness to it. Some people like the texture, some people don't. It goes great in this pickle, and the texture is very different when you pickle it than when it's raw. For consistency's sake, we've chosen a larger cut of onion. Our carrots are cut in these batons, and we're applying heat, so we need something with a little more structural integrity. And if you aren't familiar with how to cut a carrot like that, I'll show you real quickly. So peel your carrots or not, personal choice. When I'm using organic carrots at home, I wash them and I don't peel them. With these organic carrots in this production kitchen, I'm still peeling them. And I'm saving those peelings to go into my compost. Composting will be a different subject for a different day. But you can do it at home in something as simple as an old coffee can. You can do your own compost. And if you're doing your own compost, something else that I wanted to show you, let me get my compost out of here, is different scraps, different vegetables that we're working on are going to have seeds. Instead of composting those, you could plant them. And some cuttings, like this green onion, somebody was cutting it, got down here. This part was a little too strong to put in the dish, and so this would get composted. But if you take this and just stick the root end in water for a couple of days, you'll start to see it come to life. You can stick it in dirt, and I've got these in my backyard. They're 4 and 5 feet tall, and bees love these flowers. So it's fun to do, and you're helping out the bees, which is cool. So that's something you can do with green onion. I'm going to show you how to cut this carrot, and I'm going to show you how to get to these florets for the escabeche on the cauliflower. So we talked about trying to have a flat surface, and we don't have that here with the carrot, which is round. So I just kind of had to cut like that. But the next cut that I'm going to do, after taking the end off and composting it, is going to be to cut one side off of about the thickness of these batons that I want to make. So I can even use that as a guide. And I cut down, because carrots are hard to cut through. So please be very careful doing that and get to a flat surface as soon as you can. Now I've got a flat surface, so I'm really cool. With this flat surface, I could continue to come down this way, but that's hazardous because I've got the rounded surface. So I'm going to make use of my flat surface. I'm going to come down and cut things of uniform thickness. And then once I've got a flat surface again, I can stack them a little bit. And then I'm going to come down with the approximate thickness, ooh, tough guy, of the other veg. And so if this is what you're looking for in size of cut, that's how to get there. So as long as we're showing you these things, let me show you the cauliflower. Now, interestingly, with cauliflower and with cabbage at home, when I take out the core, I'll stick it in the dirt. And so now I have some of these growing. They aren't as successful as the green onions in growing from cuttings, but it's really fun to do this stuff. If you have the space in a windowsill or a yard or some space that you can share, what I'm gonna do to get at that core is peel these off. You could come straight down with your knife through that, but since I'm trying to save the core for the reason that I told you, I'm gonna peel back these leaves. I'm gonna get them into my compost, and I'll come in with a paring knife, a smaller knife, and I'm coming in at an angle. I'm gonna go in a circular motion with the end of my knife meeting at, as of yet, imaginary point in the center. So we're trying to get a cone out of this and get that out. So you can literally take this just like this, stick it in the ground, keep it fairly well watered, and you might have a plant growing, which again is more fun than anything else. With the cauliflower cord like that, clean it up a little bit, and you can do some of the work just by breaking apart these larger florets. Now, if you want to cook these, to blanch them in this size and serve them to guests who would cut them with a knife and fork, that would be okay. Especially for our pickle, we're going to want a smaller floret, and so I could cut it like this. I'm blocking you with my fingers, but I'm doing that so that I have a good firm grip on the piece while I'm cutting through it. Okay, I've done that, and I'm going to come down again, and there's nothing wrong with this, but it's kind of an angular cut. If that appeals to you, great. I don't prefer that. So what I want to do is I want to, instead of cutting all the way through or starting at the top, I want to start at the stem end, and I want to come in with my paring knife down far enough that I can break it. And by breaking it, I've got sort of a more rustic and natural look. Personal preference, certainly, but I prefer this look to the more sharp angles. So that's some advice of how to get into your cauliflower if you want to. Get this out of the way. I'll get these guys out of the way. And then one thing that I'm going to show you guys, purely for fun, is, again, on the note of cutting things, if you find yourself with a fresh pineapple, or you want to go get one, two things I will suggest to you. One, smell it down here. If it doesn't smell fruity and sweet, then it's not going to be a good pineapple for you. But if you smell it and you get a nice fruity, fragrant pineapple sweetness, then you're really going to enjoy that pineapple. And then cut it off right here before you start to peel it. I'm not going to peel the whole thing for you because we're going to hang on to this guy for a little while. But if you cut it right here and make sure that there's no fruit on your cutting, then again, you can stick this right in the ground, and in 3 or 4 years, you'll have another pineapple. Until then, you'll have a beautiful plant. It's in the bromeliad family. And again, this is a lot of fun, so I hope you try it out. Back to our turmeric pickle, turmeric and star anise. This is turmeric. This brightly colored, well, it's not so bright now. It's going to be quite bright when we pour hot water over it. This is a powder. I mentioned I don't like powder and little things floating around, but this is actually going to dissolve in that pickle, so it won't leave a grainy mouthfeel, and it won't cloud our water. This is star anise. You might not be familiar with star anise. It looks like a star. It's this woody pod with seeds in there. And then these are Szechuan peppercorns. Depending on, they look a lot like peppercorns, which is why they call them peppercorns. And the root of the word corn means any little piece like this, so it's not completely inappropriate to call them peppercorns. They do have a peppery flavor, and they're really going to tingle on your mouth. Depending on the store where you buy them, they may be called prickly ash, but usually you'll find them as Szechuan peppercorns. They're really delicious. Now, this recipe calls for them to be pounded. So I did bring a mortar and pestle to show you how much you might use one. If you don't foresee yourself using this very much, it's not worth getting. There are different kinds out there. The ones that you can find most easily at Latin markets are going to have more of a coarse texture, and that can be good for getting traction with things that you're grinding up. But you might choose to use this for pounding your garlic, or breaking up some spices. So we'll just take a couple of our star anise. To me, I don't mind having this in my pickle. I'd rather have this than a bunch of little, much tinier woody pieces, because this is a very woody texture. But for the sake of getting out some of the flavor, we're going to put it in the mortar and pestle and crush it up just a little bit to show you how you could have it if you want it, but I don't want that. So I'm going to use these whole guys and just steep them. This has a very fragrant licorice-like aroma and taste, a little bit sweet. And so that's going to go into our water. At the same time, folks, I'm going to get our oregano and garlic, bay leaf, salt, and whole cloves into the escabeche liquid. You can buy ground cloves. You can smash these up if you want. I'd rather have larger pieces that are easy to pick out, and they're just aesthetically more pleasing to me. So in they go. So what that's going to do is that's going to dissolve our salt, start to bring out some of the flavors of the herbs and spices, and then we're going to still have enough residual heat that when we pour it over our vegetables here, it's going to have an effect similar to blanching. If you're not familiar with blanching, blanching is something that you would do to a vegetable to make it less crunchy. And it's also going to, in many cases, change the color for the better. So a broccoli floret would be a good example. If you cut that into florets and just saute it, it's going to cook. It's going to take too long to cook. It's going to cook unevenly, and you're going to wind up with an unpleasant color. To blanch it, you're going to lock in a very beautiful color. So that's going to mean that you're going to boil water. You're going to plunge your vegetables into the boiling water. You're going to leave them, depending on the thickness of the vegetable. For a carrot baton like this, I might do that for 2 minutes. I wouldn't do it with jicama. For a broccoli floret, I'd probably only go a minute because I like more of an al dente texture. But then you're going to strain out your vegetables or pull them out and plunge them into cold water, preferably ice water, but any cold water will do to stop the cooking. So now your vegetables are ready to saute super quick in a hot pan of olive oil. They're going to come out really nice. You've got a beautiful color locked in. So that's blanching. With our ingredients here, we made it to the carrots, and then I showed you the carrot. Here we've got fennel, and we've cut it into sizes that are consistent with the other ingredients. We've got cucumbers cut differently here. We've cut these into batons. And we have some thinly sliced ginger that's going to go in and add a tremendous amount of flavor. Now, if you wanted to do super fancy cuts and arrange these in a jar so that you could present them, have at it. But I just want my vegetables mixed up, and I'm just going to combine them. There goes the jicama. There's our red onion. Here's our carrot, fennel, cucumber, ginger. Now, why did I layer them in that order? No reason. I'm going for something random here. This is a mixed pickle, but you can see that you've got a variety of different colors in there that are going to be appealing. But wait till you see it when we pour the cooking liquid over it. I'm going to do the same thing with our escabeche. So I've got mine right here. This one is also just mixed up. I'm not going to do any fancy layering. We've got our thick cut onions, jalapenos sliced in fairly thick rings. If you want the crunch of jalapeno and you want some of the heat, but you don't want all the heat, scoop out this center part. This membrane inside is what carries all the heat. And if you are sensitive to spiciness, please do check your pepper before you put it into a dish, because the level of spice in jalapenos, serranos, habaneros is very different depending on a lot of factors, the weather, the time of year. So do check it before you use it so you don't get a nasty surprise that it's spicier than you thought it was. And I'm wearing gloves because I work in a production kitchen, and whenever we're handling something that isn't or might not be cooked, we are definitely always wearing gloves, changing them frequently. At home, I recommend that you, if you have gloves, they're kind of hard to find now, but actually last night at CVS, I did see that they had disposable gloves, so they can be had. And it's a great thing to wear if you're going to be cutting chili peppers or garlic. The garlic smell is going to stay on your hands, and it might bother you later. It might even bother you the next day. The chili pepper is going to leave that capsaicin oil on your hand, and then if you touch your eyes or another sensitive mucous membrane, you're going to wish that you'd worn gloves. So I highly recommend them for cutting chilies and garlic. But now our veg are combined for our escabeche.
We have another question.
Yes, please.
Are all these veggies salted yet already?
So these are not. In this case, because I heated up my liquid and added salt to my liquid, that's where I'm going to get my salt. And the heat is going to do a much faster pickle on this. And it's, again, boils down to a personal preference. But my personal preference is with this onion and with this cucumber, I like the slightly, it's still got a crunch, but I like the slightly softer texture that it's giving me when I've pre-salted it. With this escabeche, I like it super crunchy. And so I want that salt in there as a flavoring, and it's also going to help with the pickling process, which is going to make this something that we can keep in our fridge for a couple of weeks. But I'm looking for more of a crunch. If you want a softer escabeche, you can do two things. One, you can pre-salt it, or two, you could put this into the water while it's still on the stove and even cook it. And that's going to give you a much softer texture. When you truly cook a vegetable, though, your shelf life is not going to be the same. You'll need to consume that within a couple of days, or it's going to start to get pretty funky on it. So these veg and these veg, I did not salt the same way that I did with the quick pickle. So excellent question there.
Great, yeah. Thank you.
With our escabeche, I'm not straining this at all. The recipe, folks, for the turmeric and star anise suggests that you strain your cooking liquid through cheesecloth. And so that's to the point of what I mentioned earlier. If you don't want those little pieces, those cloudy things in there, pour it through cheesecloth. You're going to remove a lot of that. But because I've left the pieces of spice larger, easier to pick out, more rustic looking, I'm choosing not to strain it. But absolutely feel free to strain that liquid if you want. I'm going to go ahead and start with the escabeche liquid. And I'm sorry that this container isn't clear. I'll give you a look there. What you're going to see now, home viewers, is that my liquid did not completely cover the vegetables. That's okay, because I don't want to use more liquid than I have to. I don't want to waste my vinegar, and I don't want it to take up too much space in my refrigerator. I got a lot of stuff crammed in my fridge. I want things to be as compact as possible. The process of the warm liquid with all the salt in it, drawing out some of the liquid that's in these vegetables, is going to raise the level of the liquid. So even though this isn't covered now, in a couple hours it will be. It may be even that by the time we're done talking, this might be completely covered. And I do press it down a little. I'm just trying to conserve the liquid. If you want to use more liquid and completely cover it, it's completely up to you. But here's the star of our show, folks. There is our turmeric and star anise. Let me get a spatula here and give this a stir to help that turmeric dissolve. And there's that stuff in that pot. I'm going to pour that over. And guys, I wish you were here. I wish you were here because I'm lonely. But I really wish you were here so you could smell this. It smells amazing. And so you'll see in there, we've got our big pieces of star anise. The flavor has been leached out. The peppercorns are in there. The liquid is only up to here. Again, I'm going to give it a push. I want the liquid to coat these veg, but I want to be space efficient. And again, as this does its work sitting on the countertop over the next hour, this is going to completely cover with liquid. And so I'm not wasting my liquid. I'm not diluting my flavors too much, and I'm conserving space. I'm going to set these aside. We can look at them again a little later, but right now we're going to finish up our pickle by just taking our cucumbers and our onions. You can already see that the salt has started to do its work on these onions. There are a lot of different variables. As I've talked about only a few of them, there are a lot of different variables with this. So once you get over that confidence hump of just making these, then absolutely experiment, find out the way you like it, what size veg you like, what veg you want to use. Do you want it spicy? Do you want it vinegary? But I'm just going half and half. Equal parts simple syrup. That's our sugar water that we boiled so it doesn't get cloudy. I'm eyeballing it, which I would not do in a production kitchen, but I'm trying to replicate what I would do at home. If you're comfortable eyeballing it, which means just looking at it and guessing, do that. If you want to get out the measuring cups, please do. I prefer not to have the clutter, but it's as simple as that, everybody. It is equal parts sugar syrup, or called simple syrup, white distilled vinegar, salt, cucumbers. And now these are not going to have a pickle texture right now, but they're still delicious. But later in the day, they're ready to eat, and they will change throughout their life. That's something to take into account, is keep track of, if you make these and on about the third or fourth day, you decide that's when you like them most. Keep that in mind, because if you're going to serve them to guests, go ahead and make them 3 days ahead of time, and then they'll be at the texture that's perfect to your liking. I'm going to do the same thing with the onions. And again, for you folks who have someone in the family who makes sauerkraut or kimchi, you'll also learn that those items, in addition to quick pickles, fermented vegetables tell a different story every day that you eat them. They change in texture, they change in flavor, and hopefully you'll be like me and you'll appreciate them every step of the way. But in case you don't, again, keep track of what day you made something and what window it is during which you appreciate it the most, so that you can make your food a little smarter. Now, as you can see, having combinations of these vibrant colors and these vibrant colors and these vibrant colors, I've got some lowest common denominator pickles. I can add these to any dish and they'll probably complement it. Here's something I can eat with corresponding Asian flavors, Indian flavors. And then this one is going to go real well with Mexican dishes. So if you're real limited on space, consider that when you're deciding what ingredients you're going to use to try out with pickles. If you really prefer Latin flavors, focus on those products. I'm sure that sounds like common sense. Now, I'm going to move our pickles out of the way for a moment. And I'm going to talk a little more about bulk purchasing. Thanks, Brian. Brian Aceves, the other Brian at Carrillo, is here helping me out. I appreciate him very much. John Pollock and Angel Galicia Mejia helped us with some of the prep. I appreciate them very much. Just want to mention that before I forget. Here we've got some items that I wanted to talk to you about. Are you still able to? No. I should have left them where they were, huh? Easier to see up here. So in talking about bulk purchasing, we touched on that a little bit. It's really good to have these things in your pantry. If you're focusing on nutrition, whole grains are going to be loaded with nutrients, and in combination with beans, you're getting a ton of protein there. That right there is a great vegan source of protein. You can augment it with any meats that you want if you like. But as far as where to buy bulk, right here near campus, UC Santa Barbara, we have some great options. So Spartan Final does have bulk items. Albertsons has bulk items. Whole Foods isn't too far away. They've got bulk items, but my favorite by far is Sprouts. To me, the selection that they offer and the prices are really amazing. I love to buy beans there, grains, but you can also find nuts, trail mixes, some types of candies, and they're really good pricing. One thing that you'll find right now and until indefinitely is you used to be able to buy spices in bulk at Sprouts, and I wanted to recommend that to you because it's a great way of buying a little bit of something if you want to try it, an obscure ingredient, instead of buying a whole jar that might cost $5 or $10 or $18. But during this period, they are not offering that. Hopefully that'll come back someday. The other bulk bins, though, are still there. You can't scoop the items out and get whatever quantity you want, but they have pre-bagged amounts that are reasonable amounts. So you can still go in and get those things. And so if you are someone who eats chia seed, I love chia seed, and it's by far the best price there. I love going to Trader Joe's, but the price on chia seed for a 12-ounce package is quite a bit higher than buying it by the pound at Sprouts. So I really like that. As long as we're talking about chia seed, if you're doing that, you should reconstitute it with water, or you should add it with water, hydrate it with water. A great ratio is going to be 7-to-1. So 7 parts water to 1 part chia is going to give you a really nice texture that's great for making parfaits, putting in your oatmeal, anything like that. And if you're not too concerned about the fat content and you want to make a special treat, instead of water, use coconut milk, and that is going to be amazing. Then you can mix it with all kinds of things, nuts, cereals, granola, and make yourself a little parfait or a little treat. You could even make a pudding-like dessert. So all kinds of things that are wonderful to buy. Here are just some examples. Wild rice, they've got many, many varieties of rice, which I don't think vary too much in their nutritional content. Don't quote me on that. But the big thing is textures and colors. Now, one big nutritional content difference I can tell you about is that polished grains, white rice, white sticky rice, those aren't going to have the nutritional content that a whole grain will. So brown rice is great. Barley is great. We've got farro here. This is a
Brian,
package. Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to jump in and just be mindful of the time. It's 12:03.
Oh my goodness.
Right. We were having such a great time. I want to give a chance. Thank you everyone for staying with us. If you have any quick pickling questions or bulk, absolutely. There's been some changes in the bulk department, but it's a great place to experiment with different flavors. I haven't used any spice stores online, but I know that that's also a great way to try different spices and maybe get them a little more sustainably sourced. So does anyone, any participants have any questions for our master pickling chef? I am really sad that we're not there in person because they all look very tasty. Anything? All right, I'm gonna give a couple more minutes, Brian, if you wanna wrap it up, and then I will be emailing out all the recipes that we covered right now. So feel free to email me if you have any more questions or you're starting to work on these recipes at home, and we can get you the answers that you need. Thank you everyone for participating. I think this went really well and I learned a bunch, so I'm very excited to try some new pickling techniques. I'm gonna give it back to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mallory, and thanks everyone for joining us. I really appreciated the opportunity and privilege to do this. I hope some folks got to see some things and learn a thing or two that they might not have seen before. I am going to take a moment now that we've let a couple minutes lapse to show you, well, you know, it hasn't actually been enough time, but again, here we are with the liquid coming up on here. The colors are beautiful there, but in closing, buying these things thoughtfully, mindfully, keeping track of what you're bringing home, buying a variety of vegetables that you're going to use fresh in whatever way, but those that you can also pickle, thinking about things that you can buy to add color to your dishes is going to make your dishes more appealing to you and to any guests who you may be serving. And so I hope this helps you to make choices. One thing that I didn't show you with this basic cucumber is, and one thing I didn't reveal is, that a lot of things that I make very simple are because I have a 3-year-old at home who likes simpler things. One of my favorite ways to enjoy this pickle is with some dill. And this happens to be dried dill, which is fine. Fresh, even better. But you just sprinkle it in. This is another exception to my no small twiggy things. I do not mind little pieces of dill in my pickle at all. And that's going to make it absolutely delicious. But experiment with herbs, experiment with different flavors, and I hope that you get a lot of mileage out of trying some of these things that we looked at today. I thank everyone for their time, and I hope that when things, when some of this craziness subsides, that I'll get to see you at one of the dining halls.
We hope so too. Again, I'll be sending that email out. If you have any feedback or other recipes you'd like to see us work with dining on, please let us know. And again, thank you so much for your time, and happy Wednesday, everyone.
Thanks, Brian. Great job.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much,
Brian.
Brian. Great job.